And we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to Sports to Suits. My name is Amanda Banks. I am the weekly host of the show where I highlight former athletes that are doing some incredible things in the world and in business. And I'm so excited today to have Anthony Hales Jr. on the show. He has done some amazing things and is such a powerhouse. So, Anthony, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. So it's my honor and pleasure to be here today.
Super excited about this conversation. I mean, you've got such a background. Oh my goodness, you've got so much experience. Why don't you share with the audience as people are popping in a little bit about yourself, so your athletic background, as well as a little bit about your business background as well.
So good. So thank you. Anthony Hales Jr. I'm originally a Mississippi native. So my athletic background, I played football at Jackson State University, the Tigers, fullback from 2003 to 2006. In 2014, I launched my company, Bain LLC. At the time, it was Hales Government Solutions, where we went through a rebrand about 3 years ago. So as a company, our primary line of business is we conduct market research on public projects. So anything from healthcare to transportation, workforce and labor. Like I would say those are our three biggest primary things. We also do some work in economic development. So market research, strategic communications, professional development. Those are the three major fields we work in. There's a lot of other stuff we do, but that's kind of the major part of background of who Bain LLC is.
Well, and if you're out there listening, definitely let us know where you're listening from so we can kind of get a feel for where everybody's from. I do want to start out with like the whole football background. So have you always been into football, or was it something that, you kind of played a bunch of different sports? Or tell me a little bit about just your sports background in general.
So yes, so I've played football, pick up flag football from an early age. I didn't actually play organized football until about 8th grade. My parents was really concerned about the physical damage of playing youth football and as it builds later on in life, which I do appreciate that now that I'm in my late 30s. I played when I was younger. Played baseball. High school, I was a 3-sport athlete, so football, track, and basketball. My senior year, I decided to focus on football. So football and track, and then, of course, I got a scholarship to play football in college.
So what are your thoughts on kids in impact sports? I'm curious because you said that like your parents kind of held you off a little bit on that. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on kids in impact sports?
Oh, I actually do not think kids should be playing tackle football before the age of 12. I very much do not believe that there's a need to put that type of punishment and that level of collisions on kids and youth. So, I have a daughter, I have a son. They decide to play contact sports. That's definitely around the age that I would consider.
Yeah. So when you talk about like your kiddos and sports and stuff, so first off, what sports do they play?
So I only have a 3-year-old. So right now.
Oh, okay. Well, no sports yet.
We're in gymnastics and swimming right now. That's it.
So if you're out there listening, gymnastics is a great sport. I was a junior Olympic gymnast. So gymnastics is a great sport for young kids to start developing some hand-eye coordination, a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of good mindset stuff. So so out of curiosity, so you went to college. What did you go to college for?
Mass communications was my undergraduate degree. Originally, I wanted to be a reporter. So I could tell you the story of that. I originally went to school. I wanted to be a reporter. I was a reporter in high school for a local newspaper. It's one of the things I did do in high school. Then there was a student at my school. I think his first job out of college was they sent him to, I don't know if it was Iraq. And so when I saw that, I changed my major.
You were like, no more.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, either you're gonna have to go to like a very small town somewhere far off to start your career, or you'll be thrown into a hazardous condition. So I went to advertising. So mass communications with a focus on advertising. That was my undergraduate. My grad school, I got a master's in public policy at George Mason University.
Oh my goodness. So the transition, like I want to talk a little bit about the transition outside of sports, because I think that people don't recognize how difficult this is on some people. So I really want to hear like a little bit about your story around, when you were in sports and you put the football up and you went into business, like how was that transition for you?
So it wasn't a direct transition. There was a pit stops. I went from football to work in the federal government for a while. So the transition out of sports. So there is a point, I think, particularly in football, right? I think we all go to college with this dream that we're going pro. Some people, the dream dies a little earlier. Some people, they do see their dreams. Some people, they come close to their dreams. I pretty early on recognized that I probably wasn't going to have a career at the professional level, which is looking at the draft and statistics, people who played my position.
So you looked at it from a data perspective.
Yeah, I looked at it from a data perspective. Like, I'm probably not going to the NFL, so I need to figure out what I'm going to do alternatively. So early on, I started looking at, okay, what do I want to do as a career option? And then by the time I got to my senior year in college, I had already kind of transitioned to the phase of trying to figure out I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but trying to figure out life outside of sports. Because I saw so many people who had no plan B, and then when sports did not work out, they were lost, and I didn't want to be in that position.
And that is so common. So if you are listening and you are a existing athlete, regardless of what sport you're playing, I mean, this applies to gymnastics, football, soccer, whatever it may be, start working on what life outside of sports looks like. Because, I mean, I don't know exactly the statistics around this, but a very small percentage of athletes actually go professional. I think it's like two or something like that. Like it's very, very small.
Very, very small. Now, I remember the NCAA used to run these commercials. Most of us are going pro in something else.
So how did you prepare that? Because that's something that I want, people that are listening to the show, especially athletes or younger kids that are in college, like, how did you go about starting to prepare for life outside of sports, and what mechanisms did you put in place? Because you've had a very successful career and you very successfully made that transition. So what, not only from a mindset perspective, but also from a process standpoint, what are some things that you put in place to prepare for life outside of sports?
A lot of it's really trying to figure out, okay, how to replace the thrill of sports. So I think the biggest thing you kind of miss is the thrill of competition, which is essentially what got me into business. Business was the first thing that actually I found that kind of replaced the thrill I got from playing football. The biggest transition for me was like, okay, how do I reorganize my schedule? Because, life, when you're an athlete, particularly in college, right, your life and your schedule is very defined. You have class at a certain time, you have practice at a certain time, and everything kind of centers around that. So for me was, okay, I need to keep a similar schedule, but stay focused. I know I want to stay in a good shape fitness-wise, so developing a fitness routine that is a little different than me preparing for a sport, just to be healthier for the rest of my life and really start to get an understanding of who I am. And the good other thing is like really the question of what do I want to do? Because a lot of times, like, you go to college just thinking about I want to do this. The athlete, like the sport defines you as a person. So how do you define yourself when you're no longer an athlete? And that is the biggest thing. Like, okay, who am I? What do I want to be? And really, I would say post-college, I went on a 4 to 5 year journey of just self-discovery, reading books, just getting the core of understanding who I am and, why I am how I am and what am I actually good at? What do I enjoy?
So when did that light bulb moment come on? You said like 4 to 5 years, you went down this journey of like developing self-awareness and actualization, like what you were really wanting to focus on. Like, what was that light bulb moment that you were like, this is what I want to do?
So when I moved to DC, into 2008. So I moved here to the district, and again, it's one of these things where like it was the first time I had been around, I would say, non-athletes, wealthy African-American non-athletes, right? So this was the first time I got to see a different world of, these men, these women who had built great lives for their family.
Well, there's energy. Like DC has energy.
Yeah. So it's the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, how is things going? So, and I would, so I literally remember, I can tell you the moment. We were preparing for a gathering at the church I attended. And there was a conversation about who boat are we going to take out, whose yacht. And there was an argument over whose yacht we were going to use. There's like 5 brothers arguing over these yachts. And I kept perspective, like, okay, does everybody have a yacht? Like, what does this person do? Okay, he has a contracting firm. He's getting contracts with the Pentagon. This person has contracts over here as justice. So I started to see this world of like these business owners who had built these consulting firms, defense contracting firms. And for me, that was the first time I started like really thinking about, okay, business. It wasn't an immediate switch. It made me start thinking, okay, what type of skills do I have that I could bring to the free market?
That is powerful. That is a great segue to how athletes leverage their existing skills to carry that into success in business. And in your case, it was business, but it's also now entrepreneurship. So
yes.
What are some of those skills that you would say that are like top ranked? This is what 99% of athletes have and carry over into the business community.
I say a couple of things. I get the biggest ones, right? One of the biggest things you learn in athletics is focus.
Yep.
The ability to focus on the goal, the next game, the next play. I would say 2, discipline, like the ability to keep a good schedule. As far as your diet is concerned, or workout regimen, all those things are important when you cross over into the world of business. And then just a short memory, long vision, but short memory. That's what I like to say, right? So in football, we always say, hey, forget about the last play or forget about the last game. Focus on the next play, focus on the next game. And I think in business, that's very key. You can't get caught up mourning over your losses, or you can't get caught up celebrating your wins too long.
Well, in entrepreneurship and like even in business, like you get kicked in the face regularly.
A lot.
Like you get kicked in the face. And if you dwell on every single moment where you're seeing any type of like failure, right? Because failure is a necessity for success, in my opinion. Like you have to fail over and over and over again and be disciplined enough to keep trying and trying and trying to actually get to the win. Do you see that in your business life as well?
Yes, and you learn. And then here's the thing, things evolve, business change, the markets change. So there are things you may have done to be successful and the market may switch over overnight. One of my favorite books actually is Only the Paranoid Survive, which is probably right here to my right if you look. And it's one of the big things where he dealt with, where they had a business model that was like suddenly threatened, and how do you switch at the moment? I mean, think about if you invested in taxi cabs and all of a sudden Uber hits, or you're in the hotel industry, Airbnb, how do you then pivot, fundamentally change your market to survive? So I think it's one of those things where like in business, you can't get too high, you can't get too low. And you always got to remember the good times won't always last.
That is so powerful. And that's like, I think everybody, especially with COVID going on, like I think every single business, as well as every single individual, has had to figure out, okay, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for the business?
Yes, COVID definitely took a toll, and it definitely exposed those who hadn't prepared for sudden shifts and were less nimble.
Well, I think grit. Like, let's just be real. Athletes have grit. Like down and dirty grit, like challenges, give it to us. We're going to spearhead forward. Like that's just the nature of competition in athletics. And I think that that's something that I've seen, a lot of people that have seen success throughout this COVID period have a really strong determination and grit.
Yes, definitely. That is definitely one of the things COVID COVID has actually, I mean, I don't want to say COVID. It's been in the pandemic, we did better in business than we ever done before. Actually, our
Wow.
business grew a lot during the pandemic, but a lot of that was also kind of recognizing emerging opportunities and being able to shift very quickly to assistant areas.
Yeah, I mean that's so critical. Like finding areas of opportunities and executing on those opportunities, right, and bringing value to the market. It seems like what you guys have done, you guys have sought out those opportunities, you've found problems, and you've spearhead those problems, and you've executed.
Well, and sometimes your clients just needed solutions. So we had clients, right, that we were providing certain services to. When COVID hit, they didn't need those services. They needed someone to help them figure out the global supply chain and how to get PPE products, right?
Yep.
So we jumped in that and helped a couple clients secure large shipments of PPE equipment, which is, it's not a core business opportunity. It's something we had to learn and was like, hey, this is something they need help with. And if we can provide value here as a client, if we can provide value to our client in this area, we believe we can build a long relationship. Because now if they need anything else, they'll come back to us and actually say, hey, is this something else you can get?
And that's like connections and networks. So that I want to dive into that because before we went live, we were talking a little bit about connections and networks. And, you and I met through LinkedIn, where we're part of a network. And without that, and us actually reaching out and saying, hey, let's connect, let's get to know each other a bit better, this probably would have never happened, right? And so, especially for athletes or existing team members at companies, go ahead and start finding business networks and connections outside of the connections that you are already in, the networks that you're already in. What are your thoughts on that, Anthony?
So I think in general, right, let's talk about whether it's high school, college, school is probably your first network. Outside of your family, school is your first real network.
Yep.
You don't realize it 2 years later sometimes, but it is your first network. A lot of times your first maybe business partners, if you go start a firm, your first investors. A lot of that comes from dealing with your classmates. I think with sports, in particular athletes, like we were speaking about earlier, it presents an opportunity even more because while you're playing sports, whether it's high school or in college primarily, but even in high school to a degree, right, there are certain networks of people that you have the ability to connect with that you will not have the ability to connect with later in life. So because this person is a fan of the team, that person will likely may take have breakfast with you, take a meeting with you, and you get a chance to build a relationship there that you may not have the opportunity to come back and build if you wait 5 years down the line. So one of the things I do advise like young athletes is outside of athletics, right? Outside of what happens on the field, on the gym, the court, whatever your court action is, take some time to sit down and really talk and use advantage of your network. Because there's a person right now who they're manager at a bank, they own a car dealership, insurance company. There are people right now that are willing to sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk to you and pour into you and get to know you that may not be willing to answer your call if you wait 5 to 10 years now and try to come back.
Well, and this remote environment is providing a great opportunity for this. Like I've had conversations with people in New Zealand and conversations with people in Australia because the remote society, it provides us access to people that we typically wouldn't have access to. And so one of the things, so you're talking about high school, specifically students or even college students, they have families. Those families, depending upon what they do, they could be doctors, attorneys, they could be on the career path that you're looking to go down. So reach out to those people, like get to know, like there's people everywhere that are willing to help. And that's what's so beautiful about, I think, this remote environment is you, like you said, Anthony, you have access to people that are willing to take a coffee meeting or access to people that are willing to just mentor you. Whereas you typically wouldn't have access to those types of people.
Yes. And that is, building that capital, I think will give you a good head start in life. I have a friend, they play college football out in California, And a lot of their they have investment firm, and a lot of their early investors were the family members of their teammates.
I mean, right? But if you don't ask the questions or try to get to know these people, you'll never know.
That is true.
So if somebody's listening and they're like, how do we leverage this social media scenario to get access to people? Anthony, what are some tips or tricks that you would give to people?
I think Amanda, you've done a really great job. I think what you're doing is actually one of the best ways. Start putting out content and highlight people. I think people appreciate that. Like, there are a lot of people, a lot of business owners out there, a lot of influencers who want to share their story, or they want to promote themselves. They don't know necessarily where to start. And it's a little different if I come to them trying to sell them advertising time versus saying, hey, I would love to interview you on my podcast and tell the world about your story. I think that is one of the key things to you're providing value. That's a great way to leverage it.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. I'm just going to throw it out there. I am not a professional broadcaster. Like, we don't have all the answers, right? But here's the reality of connecting with people through LinkedIn or even doing content and videos. Like, people get to know you, and you never know who's listening. So even if it's not professionally done, just do it. I mean, if you keep putting it off, you'll never do it, right? Because quite frankly, and I don't know about you, Anthony, but this is, not super in my comfort zone, right? Yeah. But the reality is we're in a digital world and you've got to do these things. So how are you guys seeing? You mentioned that you have, you've got a couple of offerings and you've kind of pivoted a little bit. How are you guys going about client acquisition? Because I know that that's something that a lot of people are asking about. You've mentioned growing the business. So how are you going about finding new clients?
So a lot of it's organic at this point. Because we're dealing with our market is very targeted right now. We deal primarily with state and local governments. A lot of it is relationships. We work with a person. So if I work with a person who's at this agency and all of a sudden now that person gets a promotion to another agency or they leave, hey, just reconnect with that person. Hey, congratulations. And just, hey, a lot of times you're at the top of that person's head. So if they need something, you've done a good job over here, we'll come to you. So a lot of our client acquisition right now is more organic growth. Actually, then we do, we like everyone else, we do marketing, we write, we respond to RFPs, we do the typical sales mechanisms. But a lot of our growth right now, honestly, is organic. It's relationship based.
Well, and it sounds like, though, if you've got repeat clients and you guys are growing through an organic reach, you have incredible customer service.
So that's the good thing. And that's the thing when you start to figure, that's the one thing I think as you start to scale, is trying to figure out how to create, you can't duplicate yourself, right? And so Amanda Banks, no one is going to care about Amanda Banks' company like Amanda Banks. But how do you, to the best part, create a culture that those values that brought you those clients is still, extended even when they're not dealing with you directly?
Well, you've got to make it personalized. Like, you've got to make them feel good about continuing to do business with you, right?
That's definitely, I think so. And then you hear the things, you hear the stories about Steve Jobs up in the middle of the night responding to like random emails that were coming to the Apple inbox. So, and I definitely think you work hard to stay connected and to make working with you an enjoyable experience.
So if you're listening, one of the most powerful things that I have ever seen as far as success is concerned, write handwritten thank you cards. It makes a big impact. I can't tell you the amount of times I did a lot of work in hospitals and health systems that I would go into client meetings and they would have a thank you card hanging up on their desk that was written by me, but I always put my contact information in there. So if you're listening out there, handwritten thank you cards with your contact information can become like little magnets on the side of people's desks.
And Christmas cards, but you gotta do the Christmas cards like the week after Thanksgiving, because if not, people won't get them to like they leave, they come back for Christmas.
So are you signing all the Christmas cards? Like, are you?
Yes, we make it a family tradition. I have my business thank you cards and then my personal Christmas cards. We just, we have a full day where we sign.
Hey, the personalized touch is so important. Another good tip, if you're listening, is do audio recordings of messages rather than text messages through LinkedIn. So if you're wanting to talk to somebody or thank somebody, audio works because it stands out. So you said something, Anthony, I want to take the conversation back a little bit, because you mentioned something that's really powerful and something that I struggled with. And I know a lot of former athletes struggle with this because it's not sustainable. So the minute you leave the sport, your physical fitness has to change. And I don't think a lot of athletes, even a lot of people, really think through this, because the reality is, Anthony, you can't work out like you did playing the game. Let's just be real.
That's true. I wish we could just work out 3-4 hours a day again, right? Between practice and the gym. I struggle with that. I struggled with weight gain right after college because I was still eating macaroni and drinking Hawaiian punch every day. But you can do that when you're in college, right?
It's the ramen noodle diet. That's the only thing you can afford.
But we had practice 3-4 hours a day, right? And I was in Mississippi, so we're practicing in 100-degree sun. You're in Tennessee. I don't know if that's where you were originally from, but so your body responds differently. You definitely have to learn to discipline yourself a lot and finding a regimen you enjoy. Because I think sometimes training for sports and the way you train for life is a little different. And
you don't have the team surrounding you or like the support system in that space. Because like if you were late, the coaches, your teammates were all over you, right? Like you had to show up and be there. But like it's easy once you get out of the sport to kind of be a little bit lax in regards to that, be like, oh, I'll catch it tomorrow. But also like your body doesn't process things the way that it did while you were in the sport. I mean, metabolism isn't as good. You're not working out as hard. So how did you, because you're in great shape. So how did you go from sports to having struggles with that and then trying to find discipline around ensuring that you were taking care of your well-being?
So a couple of things, trial and error. I grew up in Mississippi, so I saw just some of the long-term impacts of not taking care of your body and what it does to your health in your later years. And for me, I always wanted to avoid that. My fitness appearances is important to me. So I just feel better when I'm in decent shape. Like I just feel better. So for me, that's very important. And even psychologically, like when I don't work out for a couple of days, like it bothers me. I just feel I'm not at my peak.
So do you think that's because of the discipline that you have over a long duration of time?
Yes.
So anybody that's listening out there, like I have struggled personally with this. I like to go on the show. I lost 25 pounds. I've maintained that, but it's the only way to do it is through discipline, diet, and exercise. That is it. There's no miracle.
And I think sometimes that first goal is good to get you back in there, right? So let's say, right, you wanted to lose 25 pounds for the show. So now if you lost 25 pounds, you're probably like, hey, I like the way this looks. Yeah. So now there's encouragement to keep it going. So sometimes people will be like, you shouldn't have fitness goals for like events. But I think that is a very good way for people to like get started, right? So I can't remember, I was going to a wedding. So I tell you, I was struggling after college, right? I gained a lot of weight and I was headed to a wedding and I didn't want to show up at that wedding. 30, 40 pounds heavier than I had been in college. So for me, my initial assessment, okay, let's figure this out. And you just, to me, once you get to the point you start feeling better, you want to kind of keep that going.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. So if you're out there, like and you're off track, like it's totally okay. Like even some of the top ranked athletes in the world go through this process, right? So like don't put a lot of pressure on that, but set a lofty goal, not weight loss. I found that if I set weight loss goals, I would always fail. But if I set like goals around just like run 4 miles. Like that's a freaking lofty goal if you've been on the couch for 15 years, right? But it wasn't the weight loss piece. So I have found, and I don't know if you've seen it too, not setting goals around weight loss, but around well-being and around targets as it relates to things like run a mile without stopping, enter a 5K, those types of things.
Activities. I have done the 5K. That was definitely, and I hadn't run like distance since college.
Did you train for it, or did you just say I'm running it?
No, I trained. I knew better than that. I trained for it.
Let's dive into that a little bit, because I don't know about you, but some of the things I struggle with, because I was in gymnastics and because even though it's not a physical impact, meaning I'm not running into people, it is so tough on your joints and your body. Do you find that like when you were training for your 5K, like is it hard to get over some of the struggles around the physical pain?
Definitely. If you haven't run and all of a sudden now you start running in particular, I know people talk about lifting weights, but if you have not run and all of a sudden you start running distance, that is a lot.
It's painful.
Your feet hurt, your knees hurt. It's just, you would think it's a low impact. It wouldn't be as much, but if you're not a runner, you don't probably understand like proper running shoes and stretching and warm up. And all of that, relearning all of that was a bigger struggling thing. Because I've been in the weight room pretty much all my life, but adjusting back to running was that even now I'm not a runner. I will Peloton, Stairmaster, or cycle. I can if I need to. Like there's a different level of discipline. Like my friends who are like, yeah, I'm gonna go run 20 miles this weekend. I just look at them like,
good for you. Well, but that's the thing. Like if anybody is out there that's listening, that's struggling with trying to get your physical fitness back on track, like most of us have experienced this, and it's about being disciplined and setting goals, but not necessarily like exactly the weight loss goals, but setting those goals and just working towards executing them. And if you don't hit the goal, it's okay. Keep going, keep pushing.
And you're going to look better anyway. And I think another thing is finding what you enjoy doing. So, your thing may not be running. Your thing may be tennis. You may enjoy swimming. Finding something that you actually enjoy is going to make it easier, because it's hard to get out of bed every day and go do something you don't want to do. Now, if you think going to a job you don't want to go to is hard, try doing some physical fitness activity that you absolutely do not like every morning.
So let's talk a little bit, because you said a job you don't like, because I want to talk a little bit about this, because I feel like every single one of us has the opportunity. We find jobs straight out of school. We try to find what we're really looking towards, what we're really passionate about. And at some point, some of us have that light bulb moment, but some of us just are still kind of lost, right? And so it seems like what you've kind of done is you've had some stepping stones along the way as far as working in different jobs. And I want to talk a little bit about your thoughts, because one of the things, so Sherry Joe, I nearly died walking 6 miles this weekend. Never thought I was going to be. Hey, I feel you. Same. It was one of the hardest things was to get back to running. Totally agree. But going back to the comment, like for people that are just kind of, going the corporate ladder, right, and just finding opportunities, like what are your thoughts around that?
I think even if you get in business, even if you get your dream job, all of us have to do some stuff we don't like to do. There are things that I have to force myself to do that literally I have to like cut off everything, log off social media, pause my phone, and force myself, I am going to finish this task.
What are those tasks? What are things that you're just like, Anthony's just like, nope, done. Mine are spreadsheets. I can do them, but I hate working in spreadsheets.
It ain't so much I hate, right? I'm good at it. I don't necessarily like it. It's proposal writing, like responding to government RFPs. It's one of those things where like I have to force myself to like focus on this task and eliminate all distractions. And literally, like I call Mondays typically are my business development days. So like literally all I do on Monday is BD work. So like typically I'll write proposals. I'll start writing proposals on the Monday, right? And by 5 o'clock I'm done.
Yep.
So like there's some other stuff I can do, and I can work to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and be fine. Like proposal writing, I'm taking a nap. It is so. But it's going back to jobs, right? I think it's understanding the season of where you're at and just learning appreciate the process where you're at and just understand like I'm trying to get this done. This is not permanently, but also at the same time, ensuring that you have a path to get to doing something you want to do. And even with jobs, right? There are jobs where I walked in from day one and I didn't like it and I was ready to leave. And there are other jobs where I was there for a while and I enjoyed it for a season. Then, after a couple of years, it was time for me to move on to something else. But I appreciated the time that I had there. There were a couple of jobs where I was like, I need to get out of here. But there are a couple of jobs where I enjoyed. I was there for a couple of years and I enjoyed like the process of being there and what I learned there. There came a time for me to move on.
How did you learn? So government RFPs, if you're listening and you're not familiar with government RFPs, they are long, strenuous. There's a lot to unpack there. So how did you get into, because that's an area of expertise, right? Like not everybody knows how to navigate government RFPs and do so successfully. How did you learn all of that?
So when I first moved to DC, I worked for a small consulting firm, my very first job in the city. And in that job, we were working on local government, primarily transportation projects. So I learned a little bit about the space from that side. I then went into the federal government for 9 years. And so while I was in the federal government, I became a contracting officer's representative. So as a core, you oversee a contract, performance, as well as like the process of selection. So I from the core side, I understood what we looked for in the contractor. So when I went into the business side of things, I understood what they were looking for from proposals. And that was kind of like the process of how I learned to respond to proposals. And then, when I didn't win, I would just ask for debriefings. And that kind of helped me with the process of understanding how to tell a story and even proposals at different levels. Because I can tell you, right, a proposal for $100,000 contract and a proposal for a $20 million project, that's a different level of effort, and and a much bigger team is involved. So understanding like where you're competing at and what are they actually looking for. Because the biggest thing is,
you said something super powerful though, as far as debriefing. You asked, what didn't work, right? Like you asked for people's feedback so that when you had an opportunity again, you knew how to reposition it.
Yes, and I used to go in there and say, hey, if you think what we submitted sucked, just tell me that it sucked. I would rather you tell me the truth than for me to keep submitting something because I think it's good and it's really terrible. So I always broke the ice like that. If you think what we submitted was inadequate, I would rather you tell me the truth. I'd rather you hurt my feelings now so I can improve versus me to walk out of this room thinking that we did a good job and we really were terrible.
Well, and this is a barrier. Like I want to blow this up because you're saying something that is so fundamentally important. Every single organization has to sell things, okay? And every single organization has to understand positioning. So whether or not you're, a startup company and a CEO where you're having to put together proposals, or you're an employer actually looking to accept those proposals, there's got to be better communication here. Anthony, how many times have you submitted a proposal and it's been crickets?
A lot.
Well, and I think that if people just provided feedback, it would do a lot of things, but one of those would help people better understand, how do I solve your problems for you?
That's definitely the truth.
But you did something powerful and you asked for that feedback. And I think that a lot of salespeople don't ask for that feedback.
Yeah, I think, it's the inability to self-assess, right? You have to be able to self-assess and know your strengths, know your weaknesses. What are you really good at? What are you not really good at? I can tell you from the services that we offer where we're strong and we can compete on our own, where we compete sort of like a B level. We're okay, we can do it, but we're not great and we're not going to compete against the top companies. So understanding your position and how you measure up to your peers, I think is very important. And to me, like, again, the ability to be honest with yourself and honest with yourself as a company, I think is very key.
Well, and transparency all the way around, especially for people like, I mean, some of these like contracts, like you said, are $20 million. And if you don't know why it wasn't accepted or what was wrong, like, you can't get better from that. But I have found that there's a lot of, people that won't give that feedback. Have you found that too?
That is to a degree. Sometimes you can ask for it. I think so. There are some rules, right? If you go for a contract a certain amount and you lose, you have the right to ask for a debriefing, depending, right? So you have a legal right to get that feedback. When dealing with the public sector, you don't always get that from the private sector. So if you're dealing with in the private sector, you have to be a little more measured with your approach. Maybe, than the surveys. Like, you got to figure out ways to like really just get some honest feedback. And then sometimes you may even just ask people to come critique you. Like, there are people out there you could pay to come critique. Like, I want you to read this and tell me what we did wrong and what you think, and be honest. But I do think understanding how you measure up is so key.
So what are the best tips and tricks? Because this is a skill, like writing big RFP proposals, that is a very specialized skill. And you have a lot of experience in this. So if anybody's out there listening, Anthony, what are some of your best tips or tricks and things that you've seen successful in regards to this?
So the first thing, right, is always, I would say, proposals. Government RFPs is one of the places where I say the content actually matters a little more than the presentation. You can submit a nice proposal, but you don't cover any of the points and it doesn't get accepted. And particularly when you're dealing with new clients, right? If you're dealing with a client that's a repeat customer, there's a certain level of like lack of detail you may can get away with in responding because there's a reputation and we trust that you can do the work. When someone who has never heard of you before, never seen your customer, especially the first time I have read about your company is in this proposal, I need to be able to read what you have submitted and believe that you are capable of completing the job. The worst thing that any contracting officer wants to do is give a contract to a client that's going to create headaches and extra work for them. Like, I'm coming to you to, relieve a burden and take on the job, not to create more work for me. So I think when you're responding, you should tell the story, but also ensure that you show how you're going to accomplish the task. So your proposal should almost be like a project plan.
Like, so you shouldn't have all the like pretty pictures and colors. Like, that's not the important part. It's the structure, it's the content. It's another thing that I have found personally in submitting some of these contracts is timing, and like the logistics side is making sure that you read the rules very specifically, because some people want like 3 copies in an envelope submitted to them with, do you get what I'm saying? Like, and I think people don't read all of the fine details. What are your thoughts on that?
The details are definitely, particularly government details, having your certifications, licenses, clean financials, all that becomes very important. So how you submit, that definitely is important. the presentation is important, but it's not as important, right? You should put the shiny pictures in the nice cover, but after the content is up to par, and after you checked all the boxes. But yeah, we've done that. Last year we submitted a proposal in Albany, New York, and literally we sent it to the Kinko's in Albany, New York, and hired a courier to go pick it up from Kinko's and hand deliver it and get signatures because it had to be hand delivered and signed for. That's one thing actually the pandemic has improved, that you can do a lot more electronic submissions. So there are a couple of places that are still, like the state of New York, that are still improving on those. But that's one thing the pandemic did. That was one benefit of the pandemic. Let me say business-wise was you can do a lot more things electronically, but we've done all that. We've submitted 5 copies in the manila folder and had another in a 3-ring binder. Yes.
Well, it's important. Like, it's important to make sure that you read through all that stuff. And those government contracts can be really, really long.
Yes.
Like insanely long. So I want to talk a little bit, because I know that this is something that you truly believe in as well, as like mentorship. Like, how can you help other people develop some of these skills? And also, how can you ensure that as a college student, even as a high school student, like, how can I connect the dots to ensure that I am learning from people that know what the heck they're doing? Because Anthony, as you know, there's so much noise out there. There's a lot of people throwing out content that may or may not have the expertise in what they're talking about. So I want to talk a little bit about, how do you connect, or how do you find resources to truly help? And 1, through mentorship, or 2, just from an educational perspective, because I see all your books back there. So I want to talk a little bit about that too.
I'll say a couple things, right? Look at people's track record. What have they actually done? People who put out content, but so for instance, right, if you're looking for a financial advisor, I would look and see who are some of your other clients and what have they done? How are they doing financially well, financially off? So I can compare, okay, he's been working with this. He has a pretty good track record. I mean, and sometimes in the era of Instagram, there is a lot of smoke. So sometimes it's kind of hard to see through the smoke, but doing as much research on a person as possible, and then just talk and ask questions. Because even when people put out smoke, there's this, once you start asking questions and asking people to speak intelligently about things, like you can kind of tell who really has a good understanding, or who is really doing certain things pretty fast. So, like, for instance, right, everyone right now is a crypto expert, right?
I don't claim that. That is not my area of expertise.
It's not my area of expertise, right? But there, you can very quickly ask, like, okay, how do you forecast? What are you looking at? Like, what are you kind of basing? Is it just guessing, or are you basing on certain things and real world reactions, right? There are, the same thing is kind of understanding the science and the math. You can see who you want to deal with and not deal with.
Yeah, and that's not, like, even if it's not on your team, like, this is something that I really want to convey to these people is, yes, you have incredible teammates, and in the business world, yes, you may be part of a team, but find people outside of that team that you can connect with, that you can network with, that you can learn from, even if it is just from a content perspective, because it's so critical to make those connections prior to life outside of sports, or prior to life outside of your corporate career, which is a transition over to entrepreneurship. So you had a successful corporate career, and then you decided to go into entrepreneurship. So how did you make that decision?
So I did both for a while. I started a business. I was working full time. At one point, I had 7 employees. I literally used to take a lunch break and have a staff meeting on lunch break, and then go back to work. Literally.
That's crazy.
Yes. Yes, I tried to balance both as long as I could. At a certain point, I knew that I had to make a choice. And so fundamentally, to me, once that point came, I didn't want to live with the regrets of not taking the chance on myself. primarily, so after I had a child, so after my daughter was born, I tried to balance being a parent of a newborn, working full time, and run the business. And quite frankly, I feel like I was not doing good at either one of those. So at some point, I knew something like can't get rid of my family. So it's either the job or the business. In the business, I had some success in the business by that point. So that was for me the decision point that hey, this is something I want to do full time. And I think for a lot of people in entrepreneurship, um, you're not, you don't, you want to think that you're going to have this great runway and you'll leave on your own terms. But a lot of times you just faced with a choice. Either something happens, you get laid off and you got to figure out what you want to do, or, an opportunity presents itself in business. And the only way to take advantage of opportunity is to walk away from your 9 to 5. And I think a lot of times it's like those hard choices, what I call, what you say, you got to take the red pill.
Yeah.
It's never. I'm not gonna say never because some people may have the transition. But I'm a plan this, and this is how I'm going to exit. A lot of times, you just get faced with a choice, and you gotta make a decision.
Kicked in the teeth. Yeah. That was mine. Like my daughter's school got hit with a tornado. And it was. I tried to work full time, then I dropped down to part time. I was launching a business. I was doing all these things, and like the reality is like you can only sustain that for so long. And so I think a lot of people struggle with this desire to want to launch a company or to even like attempt to go into entrepreneurship and follow the things that they're looking to follow. Like, what advice would you give to people that are going from that position of like from corporate to entrepreneurship? Because it takes a certain breed, in my opinion, to thrive in entrepreneurship. So what advice would you give to people that are going through that right now?
So I think a couple of things, right? I think the first thing, and let me break it down into two different groups, right?
Okay.
There are those, I would say, young, you don't have a family. If you want to dive right in, dive right in. Just figure out what you need to actually live and go for it. If you got to get roommates, etc., because at that point, it's just you. And whatever you need to survive is for you. For those who have, you may have a mortgage, you have a family, where you have to be a little more measured in your approach. For me, one of the things I think is the part of it is you need to figure out how much does it cost to be you.
Ooh, that's powerful.
So one of the first things I actually did when I was getting ready to make the switch was, okay, went through like all of our expenses. Okay, what are things that I need for us to live? What are things that I may not necessarily need, but I want, and I really want? And what are the things where I would like to have, but if need be, I can live without? And figuring out a number, and then figuring out, okay, how do I earn this much from the business to at least meet these? So, right, so that because you have a family, a kid, that there are certain expenses and things that you don't want your kid to not be able to go to the doctor because you can't afford insurance or to cover bill, or your kid can't go to daycare, things like that. So you need to figure out how you're going to cover that. So the first thing is, in that point, that can give you the math. So even if you're looking at quitting, you're like, okay, what is my path to meet this? Because the financial standpoint, to a degree, is important. Because that's going to take a lot of pressure off you. Because if you are, in business, right, sometimes the returns are not right away.
No, it takes time. It takes time to generate.
It takes time to generate. And so you got to figure out, okay, and then maybe it's not the 9 to 5, but maybe I find a side hustle or something I can do that is going to cover my base bills. And then that allows me to have the freedom to just focus on building up the business in these other areas.
So we're coming up on time. This has been such an amazing conversation. Anthony, thank you so much for joining in on me on this conversation. And I would love, how do people stay in contact with you, follow your journey, maybe even do business with you? How do people get in touch with you?
So you can follow me if you're on Instagram, I am at Mr. Hales Jr. And we can put the handles, I'm sure, into the actual show.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yes. So at Mr. Hales Jr. And I'll actually type it in now myself. On Facebook, I am Anthony Hales Jr. On LinkedIn, I am Anthony Hales Jr. The company website is www. Well, of course they did that, but thebaincorporation.com. You know, I'm so used to saying that. But it's thebaincorporation.com. That is the website if you're looking to learn more about the company. But feel free. I respond to most LinkedIn messages. I'm easy to find on IG.
Well, once again, thank you so much. And to everybody listening that supports us every week, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that these conversations are helpful and kind of give you some feedback on how leveraging athletic backgrounds and skills that athletes develop in sports and translating that over to business. We have these conversations every Tuesday, or usually every Tuesday, from 1 to 2 o'clock p.m. Central Time. So if you're listening in on this, definitely follow me or reach out to connect so that you get the notification when we do go live. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Good to see you.